The scripture reading this morning is from Romans, the 12th chapter, verses 9 through 13. Here begins the reading. Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with mutual affection, outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal, be ardent in spirit, serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, extend hospitality to strangers. Here ends the reading, the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So in addition to our brothers and sisters from around the world, we also welcome our friends who are joining us this morning online through our live stream, as well as on the radio at KTCU. We hope that wherever you are this morning, that you feel the sense of being a part of the worshiping community that is University Christian Church. So as you know, we are in the midst of a sermon series that we are calling quite literally Under Construction. We are talking this summer about what it means to build the life that we want, a life that we would like to construct before God, one that is filled with meaning, with purpose, with life-giving relationships. As you all know, our building is under construction, and it serves as a metaphor and reminder for us that all of us are under construction. We're all works in progress. And so the question that we are wrestling with this summer is, how do we construct the life that we want before God? We talked about what that life might look like, what it might look like not to pursue happiness, but to allow happiness to ensue when we're busy living the life, doing the work that God entrusted us to do. We talked about the importance of starting by building a strong foundation, a religious and spiritual foundation. We talked about the importance of finding and doing meaningful work. Last week, we talked about building our imperfect family. And today, we're going to talk about developing deeply real relationships. I think many of us are aware that friendship is one of those pillars, along with the other things that I just mentioned, one of the pillars of building the life that we want. Friends, as we all know, have the ability of lightening the load for us on heavy days. And there are few joys in life as wonderful as seeing a close friend after a long separation. I would argue that without friends, no one can thrive. We might be able to survive, but not thrive. And a clear conclusion after decades of research is that friendship accounts for 60% in the difference between many of us being happy and unhappy as individuals. But we don't need the research to prove what we already know. We know this to be true from our own experience, that a life with good friends, it can make life good even when things around us are bad. That friends have the ability to make the good times better, the bad times bearable. As Madeleine L'Engle, the great author, once said in A Circle of Quiet, she talked about her friends of the right hand. Friends of the right hand, by that she means friends that she could no more do without than we could an actual part of our body. Friends of the right hand are those who have made me know who I am, she says, who bear with me, who pick me up when I fall down, and both literally and figuratively, who shove me back into a sense of proportion and a sense of humor. Or, as a friend once told me, as she shared with me her definition of what a true friend is, a friend is one who knows the song in your heart and can send it back to you when you've forgotten the words. I hope and I pray that you have a person like that in your life. Someone that you can go to and tell anything. Divulge your deepest, darkest secret and know that you will be received with grace and not with judgment. That's my hope and my prayer for you, but sadly, I'm afraid far too many people in this world don't have someone like that. 20 years ago, Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And it was quite groundbreaking at the time when the book came out. It chronicled back then a growing sense of loneliness and isolation in our culture. And the title was a metaphor for a curious pattern that Putnam saw developing in our culture. It simply stated that more and more Americans at the end of the 21st century, or at the end of the 20th century, more and more Americans were bowling, but they were doing it alone. That while the participation in bowling was on the increase, participation in bowling leagues was on the decline. So more and more people were bowling, they were just bowling alone. But of course, it didn't just have to do with bowling. They also looked at larger trends in churches that many of us know have been on the decline for the last 30, 40, 50 years. But also Masonic lodges and elk clubs, sporting clubs, alumni associations, union halls. It all led to this understanding of civil disengagement. Of course, there was a number of factors that led to this. First and foremost, people were moving to the suburbs. And with people working more, they spent more time commuting in their cars, more time alone. We also see it, don't we? We also see it in the architecture of our homes. You may notice that prior to the 1960s, many of the homes that were built in the United States had great big, beautiful porches in the front. But after that time, many of us spent more time and focus on developing our backyards, where we can be more isolated, where there's a greater sense of privacy. But one of the larger factors, he says, was the rapid spread of television. It's no coincidence, he suggests, that the epidemic of civil disengagement began a little bit more than a decade after the widespread availability of television. Well, that book was published in the year 2000, and sadly, since then, things have only gotten worse. In fact, a survey conducted just last year by the Survey Center at American Life alluded to a friendship recession. A friendship recession. And the report noted how many Americans are increasingly lonely and isolated. 12% of the Americans asked in that survey said that they don't have close relationships. 12%. But what's even more staggering is the same question was asked of the same number of Americans just 30 years ago, and only 3% mentioned that they had few, if any, close friends. And to make matters worse, of course, as you can imagine, almost 50% of those that were asked lost contact to friends in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The most terrible poverty in the world, St. Teresa once said, is loneliness, the feeling of being unloved. The most terrible poverty is loneliness. There was a survey done, another one last year by Meta Gallup, and reported that nearly 1 in 4 adults across the world reported feeling very or fairly lonely. But what's even more dire, I would say, is that the rates of loneliness were highest amongst young adults. 27% of young adults between the ages of 19 and 29 reported feeling very or fairly lonely. 29%. Well, I would argue that it's no secret that our fixation on screens, our addiction to social media makes it easier to be alone than ever before. And I know what you may be thinking, no. Social media allows me to be in connection, in contact with a wider group of friends. It keeps us more connected, but it turns out the opposite is true. That it actually shrinks the size of our social circle. And as a result of that, many young people, adolescents even confess that making friends in person now feels awkward or maybe even frightening. Study after study show that technology that crowds out our real-life interaction greatly lowers our well-being. which is why, just in the last week, the Surgeon General of the United States recommended that we now place warning labels on social media in the same way that we might cigarettes, because it can be so harmful to the mental health of our young people. That recommendation comes on the heels of an advisory by the same Surgeon General who just last year talked about the threat of loneliness, the health threat of loneliness for Americans, in which it named social media as a potential driver of that social isolation. But just think about it. Think about it, how the way that those solitary diversions, like scrolling, like surfing the internet, it reduces our social connection. That you do those things in isolation by yourself rather than having real interactions. And you may be saying, well, no, I use my technology, I use my phone to text with other people. I DM on a regular basis, direct messaging. But actually, what we see in those situations is that in those connections, we hop from person to person, and what we end up doing is swapping depth for breadth. I read a study this week that teens that text more often than their friends tended to experience more depression, more anxiety, more aggression, and poorer relationship with their parents than their friends who text less. Maybe it's helpful for us to think of this technology as sort of a grab-and-go food at a convenience store. It's not great, but it sure is easy. But after you eat enough microwave burritos, you start to forget what a real burrito tastes like. There's something else going on that I need to mention, but I don't think I need to talk much about it, and that is simply that our poisonous, divisive culture, the culture wars, have broken down perfectly good relationships as well. Polling data have shown that 1 in 6 Americans have stopped talking to either a friend or a family member since 2016 simply because of politics. Maybe you can say it this way, that what has gone from a friendship recession has now turned into a full-blown loneliness pandemic. In easy measure, you might say, of friendship, the health of our friendships is the number of friends that you have. And depend on who you read, who you ask. Some social scientists say that it's necessary to have at least 3 friends. Some say 5, some others say a different number altogether. I would argue that those are all arbitrary and doesn't take into account your specific personality. But we all know, don't we, that introverts tend to have fewer friends, but yet those friends tend to be deeper. Those connections, those relationships tend to be deeper. And extroverts who tend to be happier in general often have more friends, but those friends are extroverts as well. And as a result of that, they tend to invest in a lot of different people who they know just a little. It's what some refer to as low-depth friendship, which is okay right up until a crisis happens, and then in that moment, you don't have anyone to turn to who knows you and loves you deeply. I realize that is generalizing, but what I want to say about that is that whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, your personality doesn't have to stand in the way of real friendship. Centuries ago, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that friendships can be classified along kind of a ladder. And the bottom rung of the friendship ladder tend to be those people that we are least connected to emotionally. And so as a result of that, the commitment between that relationship is the weakest. And it may be helpful, it may be useful, it may be work friends that help you move ahead in your career or somehow helps you ease some sort of social dynamic. That doesn't mean that you use that person, but those relationships aren't necessarily just an end unto themselves. They don't bring, as a result, that lasting joy. They are what some social scientists refer to as deal friends. But higher up on Aristotle's ladder are real friends, the ones that you admire. And you may tell them the deepest, darkest secret and know that you will be met, as I said, with judgment, not with judgment, but with grace. That you can be honest even when the truth hurts. They are the ones that help you remember the song in your heart when you've forgotten the words. Some are deal friends, and some are real friends. And if all we have are deal friends, then we lose sight of one of the most basic human needs, and that is to know others, to love others, and to be known and loved in return. One of my favorite books of all time is The Velveteen Rabbit. And my favorite part is when the skin horse is talking with the rabbit about what it means to be real. Real isn't how you were made, he says. It's something that happens to you. That when a child loves you for a really long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then in that moment you become real. Well, it doesn't happen all at once, the skin horse said. It takes a long time. And that's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily, who have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, he says, and I love this part, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off. Oh, I love that part. Love that part. By the time you are real, your hair has been loved off. And your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who simply don't understand. Friends, I don't know about you, but I'm always craving real relationships where I can know and love others and be fully known and loved in return despite my shabbiness, despite my loose joints. You know, there are some who would say that friendship is something that just occurs naturally. It takes little or no effort, and there may be some friendships that are like that. But I would argue that deep, real relationships take effort. They take an investment of time. Like anything else that is important, it requires attention, it requires work. And these relationships that lead to life must be built on intentionality and purpose. But the return on that investment can yield incredible, tangible reflects, not just on your emotional health, but your physical, overwhelming faith and health. Simon Sinek is an author who writes and talks about leadership. And he introduced not too long ago a powerful concept about dedicating just 8 minutes of genuine connection and how that can significantly impact someone's mental health and overall well-being. It highlights the profound influence that attentive and empathetic listening can have on feeling a sense of strength in the relationship and support networks amongst friends, and I would also argue family and colleagues as well. He said, it all started when my friend Maria was going through a really hard time. And in reflection, she was talking about an awful time that she'd just been through, and he wanted to be sympathetic in the moment when she was telling this, but finally he became angry and said, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you reach out to me when you were struggling? And she says, I did. I texted you. And he went back and he looked at his phone, and all it said was, do you want to come over? He said, how was I supposed to know? How was I supposed to know that you were struggling? This is just like every other text that you send me when we want to get together. Well, that led to a conversation in which she referenced an article that said that when you are struggling, that all you need is 8 minutes of a friend to hold space with you, to help you, to support you, and help you get back on track. 8 minutes. And so now they have a code. They have a code, and they text one another. Do you have 8 minutes? It simply means, I need you. And anyone, I would argue, anyone can pause a movie, can step out of a meeting, can leave a room to talk to a friend for at least 8 minutes. I would also argue that there is no greater honor that you can give a friend than to send them a text that says, I need you. I need just 8 minutes from you. When you're in your own struggle, there's no better gift that you can give someone to know how much they mean to you, that you trust them, that you let them in. I don't know about you, that is the level of friend that I aspire to be. So friends, my hope, my prayer is that you have an 8-minute friend, and that you are an 8-minute friend to at least one other person. A friend of the right hand, someone who will sing the song of your heart when you've forgotten the words, someone who will hold on to faith, hold on to hope when you have lost yours. A real friend, not just deal friends. Where, as Paul said a moment ago, love is genuine, where you love one another with mutual affection, where you outdo one another in showing honor. Because that is an essential part of our shared human experience. There is nothing better than a friend, Linda Grayson once said, except maybe a friend with chocolate. My hope, my prayer for you is that you have a friend of the right hand, for that is an essential part of building the life that we want, the life that God intends and dreams and created us to have. Amen.